Emily Gavin, and we are going to talk today about changing your dementia care mindset and solving the mysteries of dementia. So that's me, in case you haven't figured that out. I have a master's degree in occupational therapy. I'm a licensed OT. I have 12 years of geriatric experience. I have a specialty in dementia care that I've been developing over that time. And I'm in private practice now. I have a business called PhillyCareCoaching. I have an advanced practice certificate in coaching, so that gives a certain flavor to the treatments that I do as an OT. I'm also practicing something called Skills to Care, which is an evidence-based program developed at Thomas Jefferson University that is all about occupational therapy for caregivers of people with dementia. And we'll talk more about that. I'm a longtime Northwest Philadelphia resident. I've lived in Germantown, Mount Airy, and Chestnut Hill, and now I live in Germantown. And we were just talking about some of my family caregiver roles. I cared for my mother-in-law who had dementia, and I also provide a little more distant care to my father-in-law who now also has dementia.
So I'm just asking,
Yeah.
What's the difference between dementia and senility?
Senility is kind of an old-fashioned word for dementia.
Oh, that's what it is?
Yeah.
All right.
So I want to mention kind of what is occupational therapy. You just talked about a little bit about dementia. And when you hear about, just to expand on that answer for you for a moment, when you hear words like Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body dementia, those are types of dementia. Okay, so dementia is the big word.
Okay.
Did you say Luma body?
Lewy.
Lewy body.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
there's a
one
story on
type of
television.
dementia.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and are you going to get into that?
I'm not actually focusing on the types of dementia today, but what I'm focusing on is the behaviors that can come with dementia and how to respond to them as a caregiver. Okay. So occupational therapy is a thing that is sometimes misunderstood because it's got this really esoteric name. It's like, what are you talking about in terms of occupation? Does it have to do with work training, vocational training? No. So this is probably too small for you to read, but occupational therapy is the promotion of health, well-being, and participation in life through engagement in occupation. What is occupation? When we talk about occupation, we're talking about all the activities that you might want and need to do that bring meaning and purpose to life. For example, there's activities of daily living like bathing, dressing, eating, going to the toilet. Those are all occupations. Productive occupations are like work and school, and even volunteering, managing a household. Those are all occupations. Leisure would be like hobbies and play. All of these are things, rest and sleep, caring for someone else, and social participation are all things that an occupational therapist can address. So it's a very broad field. Today, what we're going to talk about is 4 different case studies from my practice that profile different behaviors that people with dementia exhibit, and talking a little bit about why are they doing what they're doing and how should you respond as a caregiver. So we're going to sort of solve some of the mysteries of dementia behavior. We're going to look at 3 different kinds of behaviors. One is repetitive questioning, asking the same thing all day long, paranoia and delusional thinking, avoidance of bathing or other resistance to care, and verbal or physical aggression. So these are all things that can happen that there are ways to understand better and work with as a caregiver. So repetitive questions, I'm sorry this slide is a little small. We're gonna start just with repetitive questions. Somebody might ask where their mother is many times a day, even though their mother is deceased. Somebody might ask, when am I going home? When they're already home. So the questions I want to delve into are, why do they do this? And what's a good response that can reduce the incidence of this? So thoughts about why somebody might, for instance, ask for their deceased family member. Why do you think that might be?
Because they don't remember.
Yeah. They don't remember that that person is gone. And they don't remember it from 10 minutes to the next sometimes. So they're looking for some kind of comfort maybe, right? And they're not finding it. And then why would somebody ask, when are we going home, if they're already home?
They just don't know where they are. A lot of them
They don't know where they are, yeah.
They don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And sometimes people are looking for their childhood home because their more recent memories have fallen away and they're looking for the home of their heart. You know?
Is there any age period where this starts? I mean, can it start in your 65 and, or
Yeah.
is it 85?
It depends on what type of dementia. There are some types of dementia that can start quite early, even in 30s, 40s, 50s. Those are a little more rare. The more common ones can come around, sometime in your 60s or 70s or 80s.
But would a stroke patient resemble some of these things, like if they're going through a stroke?
It's a little
They had
bit
it?
different, but yes, it can resemble that.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a type of dementia called vascular dementia
Okay.
that has to do with dementia that comes from having lots of little strokes.
Okay. That runs in our family, strokes.
Yeah, gotta be careful. So we're gonna do a case study for this particular thing. So Jasmine is our example. It's a big name. She asks her daughter repeatedly where her own mother is. And she keeps asking where the babies are and who's taking care of the babies. And she asks this over and over and over again, 50 times a day. Now, for these case studies, I'm going to talk about each person's occupational profile. And that's something that as an occupational therapist, we gather information about who this person is, what are their valued occupations in life. And that's their occupational profile. And that helps us to know, it helps us to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So in Jasmine's case, she was the oldest of 5 siblings. She was a single mother, and she used to care for her own mother who had dementia and passed away 15 years earlier. She was always the person who was responsible for everybody else as the oldest sibling when she was growing up. And I think that's really important to understanding her case. So, yes.
I'm sorry. That's interesting, the occupational kind of profile and,
Yeah.
and how that affects the behavior and the why.
Uh-huh.
Is there some kind of a key to that that can be helpful? I mean, the case studies are going to be helpful in thinking around it, but
Uh-huh.
is there something we can research that can help us understand that in our?
You know,
Family
there's an assessment, there's a questionnaire called the Life Story Questionnaire.
Okay,
I think you'll find that if you Google it.
thank you.
And that can be really helpful in just documenting all those details of somebody's life so that you can understand and so that you can share it with health practitioners.
Yeah, thank you. That's
Yeah,
perfect.
sure. So why is Jasmine asking this question over and over again? Thinking about her occupational profile, we can see that, you know, there's a sense of something lost. She's lost her loved ones. She's lost her life roles of being the person who's responsible and takes care of everybody. She's lost maybe some sense of herself. And she has this sort of looming sense of a responsibility not being fulfilled, right? You know, it's kind of like, you know, you're wondering if you left the stove on. If she's thinking about who's taking care of mom, who's taking care of the babies, I've forgotten something, where are they? And with her memory impairment, first of all, she has, as you said, she has no memory of asking the question or receiving the answer. And the answer that she got didn't satisfy that sense of loss. So the question comes up, what do you say? Now, I had a client who was prone to say, "Ma, Nana's dead." And that was really hard for her mother to hear again and again and again and again and again, even if she didn't remember it. It's really hard, you know, I'm not criticizing because being asked the same question 50 times a day can make you a little crazy. It can really make you want to pull your hair out. But thinking of a way, first of all, I just want to say, you know, if we think about that, like, how did you feel when you first learned that a loved one had passed? So if we think about that, and then think about what happens in your mind, what happens in your body when you experience that grief for the first time. And then what would it do to your body and your mind to learn that for the first time to you many times a day?
Wouldn't it depend on how they died? I mean, if you had, you know, your mother's sick, she's in the hospital, or you're taking care of her, and it takes a couple of years, so you're gradually getting there. When she dies, she's gone.
But I think when it actually happens, for many, many people, there's still a shock. There's still a grief. Even
Yeah,
if,
shock, no.
yeah.
I mean, I experienced that. I wasn't
Yeah.
shocked. I was grieved, but I knew it was
Mhm.
coming.
Mm-hmm. So there is the grief. And there are many different circumstances to take into account. But yeah, thank you. So in terms of telling the truth, I always say that we should speak to the emotion, not necessarily the content. The emotion here is that sense of responsibility being missed, and that sense of losing oneself a bit. So I tend to talk about, I heard this from somebody from the Alzheimer's Foundation years ago, the gift of the therapeutic fillet. Grandma went down the shore with Aunt Ivy for the week. She's safe. You're answering the question, you're telling a little bit of a lie, and if this is a parent that you're taking care of, it can be very hard to lie to the people who taught you not to lie. But here we're addressing the fact that she's not here, and we're addressing the fact that she's safe and taken care of. The babies are safe, Uncle Bob is taking care of them today. Everything is okay. You're not responsible right now. Questions about repetitive questions before we move on to the next. Yeah.
So how do you respond to the repeated, the repetitive questions?
As
You're saying you lie
calmly
or
as
deflect?
possible.
I'm sorry?
As calmly as possible, and speaking to the emotion. If you think about what the question is, because it's not always the same, if you think about what the question is and what that person might be looking for emotionally rather than sort of the content of like looking for their mother, then I think you can come up with some answers, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be the same answer all the time, but some answers that are compassionate to that emotion.
So on that, is if you address the concern and not the question, the emotion,
Mhm.
what you're saying,
Mhm.
is that is the experience that they ask the question less often because they get satisfied, or because there's a reset from a memory point of view, they kind of go back to it over and over again?
It's really gonna depend. It's gonna depend on the person. I think that my theory, and this will play out differently in every case, I'm sure, but my theory is that if you try and address that emotion rather than insisting on reality, if you insist on reality, you're having that emotional churn every time they hear the truth. Whether it's shocking or whether it's just, oh, right, okay. You know, you've still got that emotional churn and stress. And if people with dementia have stress, they are more likely to exhibit difficult behaviors. So keeping the stress level down by providing an answer that addresses the emotion and doesn't skyrocket their stress, I think is your best shot at reducing the number of times that question gets asked.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah,
I have a question.
sure. Yeah.
I have an aunt, she lives in Virginia, but when her husband passed, like, she used to call me all the time.
Yeah.
And when her husband passed, like, sometimes she would say to me, Barbara, she said, Uncle Charlie came to see me last night. and he talked to me, and he told me I'd be all right, you know, whatever. And I tried to talk to her. I said, well, Aunt Alice, I said, maybe you were listening to some music and it kind of brought back the memory, or maybe it's around his birthday time, or something like that. I would try to, you know, talk to her about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like lately I haven't heard from her, like her children, you know, I tried to get in touch, I haven't heard from them or whatever. So I know they did say it was dementia that she has, you know, and she got mad. She was telling me they didn't allow her to drive anymore, took away her car keys and all this stuff, you know, because she would get lost and wouldn't know where she's going, you know.
Sure.
But it just was,
Well, you're stepping right into the next case story,
Oh.
which is about paranoia and delusional thinking. So,
Okay.
not necessarily paranoia in that case, but delusional thinking, thinking that somebody had come to visit her who was
Right.
no longer living.
That's not unusual?
That's not unusual. So this is, and all of these cases are pretty common occurrences. They don't all happen for everybody, but when people come for help taking care of a loved one with dementia, when they're really struggling, a lot of the times one of these four is involved.
Just one thing,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah.
What's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Is there a difference?
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia.
Hyper
It's a type
type of it?
of dementia. So dementia
It's
is the
all
big
dementia.
umbrella term,
Okay.
and there are like more than 100 different types of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common.
Oh, okay.
Good question. Okay, so people may believe that their things are being stolen.
yeah.
They may believe that their spouse is cheating on them. They may believe that people are talking about them meanly behind their back. And they may believe that bizarre occurrences are taking place and be really convinced. So why do they do this, and how should I respond? Okay, here's another case story. This is an interesting one. Judy is convinced that one of her paid caregivers in her home gave birth to a child in her living room overnight.
Sorry.
She states that she saw the caregiver nursing the infant with her own eyes. Her occupational profile is that she lived a life of wealth and privilege. She had a creative career as a painter. And she believes very firmly that she can live independently and does not need caregivers in her home. So why does she believe these things are happening? Why does she think that this bizarre thing happened? Any thoughts? What's the emotion behind it?
Did she have children of her own, perhaps? Did she have no children of her own?
I don't think she has children.
Might that be?
Maybe.
So they want to get rid of the caregiver.
Well, yes, that's a possibility. One of the things that I really think is that, first of all, we know that she's experiencing brain failure, which is what dementia is. It's slow brain atrophy, which is hard. She's trying to make sense of scattered mental information, incomplete mental information. So she might have some little bit of thoughts, and she puts them together and tries to make them make sense, even though they don't make sense. She has a sense of losing control over her environment. She's got caregivers in her house 24 hours a day to help take care of her. She doesn't think she needs them. She doesn't know that she's impaired. And this is outrageous to her. There are outrageous things happening in her home. So this is sort of a confabulated, not an intentional falsehood, but a belief that she's come up with that fits in with this scenario where she just doesn't have any control over what happens in her house. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So, just the point where you said she doesn't have a sense that she's impaired.
Right.
Does that mean what like she knows she has dementia or doesn't know she has dementia in the case, or just that she knows she has it but she doesn't recognize that this is part of it? I don't know if that makes
No,
sense.
I think that's a good question. Some people, when they get a diagnosis of dementia, first of all, some people never get a diagnosis. Some people, when they get a diagnosis, don't believe it. They're like, well, yeah, but that's, it's not really a big thing. I'm fine. Some people are aware of their impairments for quite a long time, and some people are not.
Okay.
Some people, they don't have what we call insight into their own deficits. So they are going through life thinking everybody's making a big fuss, and they are totally fine. They're remembering themselves at an earlier time in their life.
Okay.
Their sense of themselves is from an earlier time.
Thank you.
So they might even say, if you said, hey, could you walk a mile? They might say, of course I can walk a mile. What are you kidding? That's easy. And they may not have walked a mile in 20 years, but their sense of themselves is from that earlier time.
Thank you.
So how to respond to delusional thinking like that? So you want to avoid contradicting, just saying that didn't happen, because then you're setting up for an argument. I don't know if you found that with your aunt.
I didn't argue with that. I just tried to change it around, and I said,
Mhm.
baby's around his birthday time, you're thinking of some music you heard,
Right,
you're thinking of,
right.
So.
A lot of people would respond to that. A lot of people with dementia would respond to that with, no, it was real. I was there. I saw it. You want to avoid reasoning. That couldn't have happened because X, Y, or Z. Like, don't you think it would be more likely that she would go to a hospital to give birth to a baby and not do it in your living room? Where's all the evidence that this happened? You don't want to reason with the person, because at that point, reasoning is a higher level cognitive skill than they have in that moment. And so again, we go to the emotion behind the belief. It's really upsetting that somebody would use your house like that. What were they thinking? I'm so sorry. That's a real violation of your home. Because that, if you think about what she's experiencing in her life, that's the emotion behind it. That's what she's looking for, is outrage. Then you can move on. She might bring it up again, but because this sense of the violation of her home is a constant in her life. So it's something to work with, and as long as you're not creating a fight every time something outrageous comes up, then you're in better shape and they're in better shape. You've got less stress. You've got, as I tend to say, more ease in that relationship. So Questions about this one before we go on to the next one?
It's really upsetting someone. Well, now I see the answers now.
Mhm.
I wish I had known. My ex-husband had, what they said, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And everything that you had up there, accusing people, stealing,
Yeah.
running around, whatever.
Yeah.
We weren't together, so I was just like, I do what I could for him.
Mhm.
I needed to get away from him.
Mhm.
And that driving part was really hazardous.
That's very
Because
difficult.
he's a veteran, so he was put in the hospital in the end, but that driving around, him not being out there, shouldn't have been out there, helped. Because he was on the highway, not knowing where he was. The actual state people brought him to my door.
Mhm.
We were separated and divorced. He's dead now. But they brought him to my door to, for any information that was needed. So it was bad.
Yeah.
But
That's
it
a
helped
really
me
tough
when they
situation.
said that he could go in the hospital.
Mhm.
I mean, I was there to help take care of him. It wasn't like we were, I
Right.
had to. I didn't really have to because we had been divorced for quite a while. But I cared enough to,
That's amazing.
Yes, and we had children, so
Yeah.
that was needed.
Yeah. I'm sorry you went through that.
I didn't know what was going on. What is wrong with this man,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. It's really hard.
yeah.
So the next behavior that we'll talk about, and when I talk about like dementia behaviors, I just want to mention that that's from a certain point of view. We tend to call things dementia behaviors when they're really bothersome to the caregiver. They're sometimes also called neuropsychiatric behaviors. Some people call them responsive behaviors, which really highlights the fact that they're not random. They happen because of something in their environment, right? It can feel like those behaviors just come and go and there's nothing you can do about them. But a lot has to do with how we approach the person, how we talk to the person, how we set up life for that person to support them at whatever cognitive level they're at. So avoidance of showering and other resistance to care is our next behavior. They might say, I just took a shower and it's been a week and a half. They might say, no, I don't want to. They might take a shower but fail to clean themselves appropriately. So they get in, they turn the water on, they turn the water off, they walk out. Or maybe they only clean the front of their body. There's a certain stage in dementia where everything behind you just sort of disappears. They might lash out verbally or physically while you're trying to help them bathe. So why do they do this and how should I respond? Okay, here's another case story. Marge hates showering. She says things like, I'm too old for this. Whose idea was this? Why are you doing this to me? Okay, she gets really upset. Her occupational profile involves the fact that her family escaped from Eastern Europe during World War II. And she has a fear of enclosed spaces. So there's some trauma in her very early life. So why does she resist showering? This setting might be some kind of a psychological trigger for trauma that she's experienced. It's a very vulnerable place. It's a place where we're used to doing this alone. Our whole life we've done this alone. and now somebody's here trying to help me do this thing, you know, I'm not used to being naked in front of some person.
Yeah, I can see that.
Also, the changes in a person's brain can change the way that they process the sound and sensation of a shower. So that noise of the water can be just overwhelming. The sensation of the water hitting your skin can be uncomfortable or even almost painful, because the brain is understanding these signals differently than it used to. So it could be too loud, could be too cold or too hot. People tend to get very, very sensitive to temperature. And it could just be confusing and upsetting, because you're naked and here's this person trying to help you, if you're at the point where somebody's trying to help you. Yeah.
I mean, is this a pretty common thing?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily just the kind of case story there, which is a kind of a, you know.
I chose the cases because
Yeah.
they're pretty representative.
Got it. So the whole idea of control and vulnerability, doesn't matter what the case is, kind of, it's common.
You know, every case is a little different, which is why I bring in the occupational profile. The reasons are going to be a little bit different from case to case, but there are some things that we can kind of keep in mind to help us see what it is about that person, what it is about their occupational profile that's resulting in this particular behavior. And what might be happening in terms of brain change that might be contributing to this behavior. So the changes in the brain are always going to sort of mesh with who is this person, what are their experiences, what are their preferences. Sometimes, you know, in a nursing home or something, people are trying to get somebody to take a shower and they've always been a bath person. Or they're trying to get them to take a shower in the morning and they've always showered in the evening. But nobody bothered to really, or was able to find that out. And so they're not able to set that activity of daily living up in a way that makes sense to that person. So there can be other reasons, but and you always need to know who the person is when you're trying to figure this stuff out. And this is when, you know, it becomes a little bit of a sleuthing game, especially if it's not somebody in your family that you've known for decades. If you're a healthcare provider, you're trying to get this information from the person, from the family. You're trying to suppose, you know, what might be the case. Yeah. So, what to do in the case of showering? Start by making a personal connection before launching into the task. You don't want to walk into a room and say, okay, we're going to go, I'm going to give you a shower now. You want to sit down, make eye contact with the person, have a conversation, and then move into the task. And that's hard for a lot of professional caregivers because they're so pressured to do so many things. And for family caregivers, it can be hard too because we've got things to do. You know, you want to get this over with, especially because you know it's probably going to be unpleasant and they're not going to like it. So in this case, I recommended that they switch to a sponge bath. There is no requirement for health or hygiene that somebody take an actual shower or bath. There are no rinse body washes and shampoos. There's even like a little thing that's like a shower cap that has no rinse shampoo on the inside. So you put the cap on the person's head, you smush it around a little bit, you get it nice and lathered up, and then you take the cap off and let it dry. You don't have to rinse it, and the person's hair is clean. No loud shower, no water pelting on somebody's skin. There are also no rinse like wipes that you can use, like bath wipes. They're big, and you can just kind of just wipe the person down. You can even, you also want to move slowly so that the person knows has time to process what's going on. Because if you're trying to get this done really quick and they're processing more slowly and all of a sudden somebody's touching them in a place that they did not expect, they're not going to be happy. Allow her to remain as clothed as possible to protect modesty, warmth, and sense of safety. So you don't have to get somebody completely naked to bathe them. You can uncover just the part that you need access to at the moment and then cover it up again. That really helps people to see this as a less invasive, less upsetting experience. Certainly, many people in this world have also experienced sexual trauma. And so that can also really be a source of, and this was a different case. I worked with somebody who did have that history and was very, very, what they call combative during personal care. And just changing that approach, slowing it down, making it more personal, making it more empathetic, really made a huge difference in her response to the experience. And you can allow as much control as possible to the person themselves. So a lot of people, while they may not be able to just go into the bathroom and wash themselves, they can, if you hand them a washcloth and say, here, why don't you get your arm right there? Or, okay, why don't you get between your legs now? That, with that verbal cue, with some, maybe, just demonstration, like, okay, just take the washcloth. They've got that sort of cue to do the thing. And while they might not be able to sequence the whole thing of bathing, they can do that one part if you ask them to. It might take a little longer, but you're giving control back to that person. You're not making them feel like something is being done to them. You are allowing them to participate in what has been an occupation that they've done their whole lives. And they may just need those bits of help. One thing I also want to mention is that I've come across a product that's called the Blue Hug. And what it is sort of a dressing gown that's made of neoprene. It's the same stuff that like wetsuits are made out of. And it's got a big two-way zipper down the front, and it's got two-way zippers down the sides. And you can get somebody completely wet, and it maintains their warmth. You can unzip a little part of it and reach in and do a swipe and then zip back up again. So it can really help to maintain that sense of modesty. So I've never talked to anybody yet who's used it. I've seen it on, their website and stuff like that, but I thought it was an interesting development, trying to address some of these issues that come up a lot. Okay, moving on to the next one. Any questions before we do that?
That was good though, to know.
Okay, so this is a really tough one, and I know find a picture. Verbal or physical aggression.
Makers.
Okay, so they may say insulting or hurtful things. They may curse a lot. They may hit, kick, or grab. Here's our next case story. I'm calling him Rodney. And he becomes physically aggressive when things are too chaotic, too close, there's too much happening too close to him. It's too confusing, it's too frustrating. His occupational profile, he's a retired lawyer. He used to volunteer in the NICU, rocking babies. And he just loves to feel helpful, particularly just around the house. He loves to be given something to do so that he feels that sense of, oh, I have a role here, I'm helping. These things of being too chaotic, okay, here's why does Rodney do these things? When he feels threatened. He's in fight or flight mode. Emphasis on the fight. Because the changes in his brain impair his impulse control. So maybe early in his life, he would have a flash of anger internally, and then he would be able to rein that in and make a choice about his response. His emotional regulation is impaired. Again, just being able to understand what's happening internally, understand what's happening emotionally in our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of analysis is gone. And his reasoning skills. Again, logical reasoning is a high-level cognitive skill. And if somebody's abilities have degraded to a certain point, they're just going to go with their gut. So all of these things, in this case with Rodney, he also had aphasia. So he had impairments in his language. And one of the things that frustrated him to no end was when he couldn't find a word. And he couldn't find a lot of words.
Yeah, I go to that.
And when people couldn't understand what he wanted, it was so hard for him. And that stress and that fight or flight response would just rise. And he might, in that moment, for a flash, become very angry and lash out.
Would that situation be worse in a person who perhaps had ADD during his life?
Maybe.
Does that make the situation worse?
I
Forgetting
think,
words and such?
I think it might make it more difficult because there are things with ADD that make just organizing experience. I mean, you already have an atypical experience cognitively. And if that atypical experience starts to degrade, then it may happen in a slightly different way than it would for somebody who has a typical neurological experience. I think it would still really vary a lot from person to person how much that really played into what happened.
Thank you.
How about medicines? You know, on TV now, there's something, in the commercial, the woman looks like the one that you had there. She looks very angry and she's arguing with people about things. She's an elderly lady, but she's kind of screaming. And they're saying, well, take this medicine now, which, you know, is medicine out here for everything.
Mm-hmm.
But is there something that kind of calms down, I guess? I don't know. It's not going to help you not be angry, I guess.
I mean, one of the first go-tos traditionally with caring for people that have dementia has been pharmaceuticals. It's been basically to sedate people so that they don't lash out. And there's sort of a newer movement of trying to understand dementia in a way that we can use non-pharmacological approaches to reduce these behaviors. And that's what this is all about, and that's what OT for dementia caregivers is all about, is, you know, and some people, you know, I have a client now who sobs for hours and hours on end, and we need to get her depression meds straightened out. Okay, so you can have dementia and still have other mental health challenges. You can have depression, you can have anxiety, and some of those things really need to be treated pharmacologically. But we don't want the go-to to be, okay, they're resisting bathing, let's give them a sedative, so that they just sit in a chair all day long. And that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
It happens more often than
Linda.
I think we'd
Yeah.
like to think.
She was good there.
Linda was accusing people to steal.
Okay, and then what should I do for Rodney? We should, in terms of prevention, simplify our communication so that he knows what we want and he's not so frustrated by confusion about communication. Anticipate and avoid the triggers that are specific to him. Create a path to retreat from those chaotic situations. If you're taking Rodney to a family event, make sure there's a spare room somewhere that you know of ahead of time, that you can just kind of get Rodney away from the noise and the chaos for a little while. And maybe even hang out there and have family members come to him in a quieter space, in a less chaotic space. Create opportunities for Rodney to feel successful. This is a huge part of what an OT tries to do, is find activities that are really going to make the person feel good. Make them feel like they were challenged and they met the challenge. It was the just right challenge according to their cognitive ability. And try not to draw attention to failures. Oh, don't you remember I already told you? Don't ever say that. Don't you remember I already told you? Or, what are you doing? You know, that sort of panic that caregivers can experience because they're trying so hard to manage this. That they make the person feel bad and dumb and incapable. And that doesn't feel good, and that can make them feel stressed and angry.
Yes, because I'm going crazy with the, what is it, everything that you need to know, this number and that number to make a phone call, 12 people you have to talk to.
I know.
It's like,
It's so
it
complicated.
has me crazy.
Yeah. And if you didn't have the cognitive ability to control your impulses, to control your emotions, all of those things, then you might have some pretty out there responses to that kind of frustration. So in a crisis, okay, we've failed at prevention, or it just got away from us, and you know, this is gonna happen from time to time. You wanna stay calm. You wanna try to remove the things that are stressing Rodney out. And you wanna give short, direct instructions. If he's grabbed onto your arm too tight, you wanna say, Rodney, let go. You don't wanna say, you're hurting me, I really need you to let go right now, because that's too much information, it's too many words. Very short, very succinct, very direct.
That's not him.
So, takeaways. I'm sorry, we're running over a little bit. Almost done. So, this mindset shift that we're trying to make involves recognizing that behavior in dementia is really not that mysterious if you pay attention. They're always responding to something. And it just takes a little sleuthing sometimes to really figure it out. Whatever it is, it makes sense from their point of view. They've got their own reality going on. We want to try to empathize. We want to speak to the emotion, not the content. Try to anticipate triggers of emotion, of the behaviors, and respect the dignity of the person with dementia. I'm going to talk for a minute about my practice. I try to create connections between people despite dementia and create more ease in caregiving relationships. My business is called PhillyCareCoaching. I am covered by Medicare under some circumstances if the person with dementia is involved in the treatment and I do an evaluation at the beginning, then I can use their Medicare benefit and the rest of my treatment can be focused on the caregiver for the benefit of the person with dementia. Because if the caregiver is calm and confident and has the support that they need, the person with dementia is going to have a better experience as well. And when I can also do direct caregiver consulting, and that's on a private pay basis without the person with dementia involved.
On that last part, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How does that kind of take shape? Is that like a virtual, telephone, in person, regular kind of? Can you talk about it?
I usually do my first visit in person in the home, and I'll drive a bit of a distance for that from Germantown, and that allows me to kind of meet the people, get to know a little bit, form a sense of an occupational profile, see the house and what the environment is like, and then usually subsequent follow-up visits are virtual. I have a HIPAA secured telehealth system, and we would go from there just with the caregiver. And if somebody's really close and they really need or desperately want in person, then I can do more in-person visits. And if there was a need, I could always follow up in person, unless it's like an hour away. So Skills to Care is the evidence-based program that I use. It helps us to prioritize problems that the caregiver is having. It helps us to problem solve together. It's just kind of a structure for problem solving and brainstorming and coming up with an action plan together. It's very client-centered, client-driven. We're really at this together. And we also work on self-care and stress management. I do, in that first evaluation visit at the beginning, if possible, I'll do functional cognitive testing. It's a little different than the cognitive testing that physicians do. And it gives us a really good sense of how that person is functioning and lets that inform for us our plan of care. And I'll make activity recommendations. If somebody is meaningfully engaged throughout the day, they are less likely to exhibit these kinds of behaviors. And if they're engaged at the correct level for their cognitive abilities. And that's it. Questions before we go?
Very nicely, very well done, thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. I'm glad. I do have, at the front of the room before you go out, there are flyers. There's a sign-up sheet if you'd like me to reach out and contact you about services. And there are also a couple of free jar openers, just because I'm an OT and we like that kind of thing. So grab one if you like it.
Are there business cards
Yes.
back there?
Yes, there are flyers and business cards.
Good, thank
Yep.
you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. This was
Thank
really
you.
Very nice.
This was great.
I thought you was going to talk about